Today we're looking at Krishna's Dhaanu Udhak. Hi, I'm Adam, and I'm an ink guy. I get inks, test them, and share the results with you. Now, Krishna's Dhaanu Udhak, I hope I'm somewhere near the pronunciation of this, is kind of a yellow-brown ink. It's a part of their, oh God, I have to read it, Antarjaami Series. And please tell me if I'm butchering this. To make sure I have a range of experience with this ink, I do the writing samples. I then put the ink into a different nib, or I then put the ink into a different pen for a day. Wow. I then put it into a Levenger True Writer with a broad nib to take my notes for this video. This might be a rough one. Before we get to the writing samples, let's look at the sciencey bits. And up first is the chromatography, and I agree with Vita that I learned a lot by doing multiple chromatographies. The one on the left is done the way it's supposed to be done. I put a line of ink down, immediately put it in the water for 10 to 15 seconds. And what we see is this kind of gray across the bottom, a little bit of fleeing up the page, and then yellow with only bits of that brown that comes through. The one on the right I let dry for 10 minutes before I dunk it into water. Now that gray line across the bottom, a little more persistent in place, a little bit darker. The yellow that pushes up pushes a bit farther away than it did, a little more separation, some of the white of the paper coming through, and less of the brown showing up at the top, which makes me feel that the brown stayed down below. Also makes me feel like there might be a little bit of permanence for some of this. Resistance tests are done to see how this ink can be expected to perform on the page, and more importantly, how hard it might be to clean from your pens. I let the smear dry for 3 days before testing it. Looking at the highlighter, it seems, for the most part, to handle it quite well. The capital H does have quite a bit of smearing that moves out and makes that a lot of that letter go away, which makes me weary using this as a note taker. Water reactivates, lifts up most of that ink like we would expect, and just like the chromatography, we do see some of the ink left behind, which makes me feel like, it might be a little stubborn to get from your pen. Pen flush does very much what the water does. I don't see anything additionally being lifted up from the pen flush, which makes me say it's either going to be water, and if it's really stubborn, I don't know that pen flush is going to be the step needed to get everything out of the pen. Bleach completely obliterates it. It is a white circle where the ink used to be. You see the dots and everything. So hopefully you don't need bleach to get this out of your pen. For the inks I've tested, I've found an average viscosity of 2.5, with the realm of normal being from 2.1 to 2.9. Krishna's Antarjaami Udhak, oh God, I am so sorry, has a viscosity of 2.73, which is on the higher side of normal. To find my average dry times, I use my writing samples done on Clairefontaine, Tomoe River, and Rhodia paper with the extra fine and medium nib. Krishna's Dhaanu Udhak has an average dry time of 7 seconds. That is crazy fast, how fast this particular ink dries. Now, let's look at the writing sample. I picked this ink up in bottle form back when I ordered about 30 bottles. Otherwise, I wouldn't have actually gotten this one because it's a yellow ink. And also with the yellow ink, I didn't use as many writing samples because yellow ink is so often given me bad results. So to keep my writing samples consistent, I use a Jinhao 159 with a Goulet 1.1 stub, a Jinhao X450 with a Goulet medium, and a Jinhao X750 with a Goulet extra fine. Let's look at Clairefontaine. Now this is not bleeding, this is me having smudges from the pages underneath. But we have no bleeding, no ghosting. The 1.1 has no feather, no spread, no halo, no sheen, and it does have shading. While it's a very light tone, it then gets to a mid-tone in its darker areas. So this was, when I first did it, I was like, yep, that's the reason I'm not doing more than 3 pieces of paper. And then I went to the extra fine, and the tone got significantly darker. The extra fine had no feather, no spread, no halo, no sheen, and crazy shading all over the place. Great shading and not hard to read. Only 5 seconds to dry. Now the medium got even darker, even more shades within it. It had no feather, no spread, no halo, no sheen. Shading all over the place. Great shading here. The scrubby 9 seconds to dry. The scrubby shows us that we're going to get a ton of color variation, and we did. The smear says you don't get to recover this. So Tomoe River. Tomoe River gives us no bleeding. It does give some ghosting, even with this light ink. The 1.1 has no feather, no spread. It does have some light haloing going on. No sheen. No real shading with the 1.1. The extra fine, it gets a little darker as a tone. No feather, no spread, no halo, no sheen, but we do see some color variation. We are seeing some shading even on this Tomoe River paper. 9 seconds to dry. The medium, significantly darker tone again. It has no feather, no spread, no halo, no sheen, and yes, shading all the way through. And I don't know how long it took to dry because I forgot to write it down. The scrubby for both the extra fine and the medium show us we're going to get a little bit of color variation, and we do get a little bit of color variation. We get more with the medium than we do with the extra fine. So this performs very well on Tomoe River. We get some shading here, not tons of shading, loses a lot. Almost no shade with the extra fine. The smear says you can't recover it because you wrote it on Tomoe River. So Rhodia paper. Rhodia gives us no bleeding, me being messy, no ghosting. The 1.1 has no feather, no spread, no halo, no sheen. It's a very, very light tone, but it has almost no shading there. With the 1.1. The extra fine, it gets to be a darker tone. It has no feather, no spread, no halo, no sheen. We get some nice shading, not as much shading as we saw before. 6 seconds to dry. The medium, again, a significantly darker tone, with no feather, spread, halo, sheen, and tons of shading all the way. 8 seconds to dry. Now the scrubby shows us we would have expected more color variation with the extra fine than we got, and it showed less color variation than we got in the writing sample. So the scrubbies weren't exactly correct here. The smear test says you likely can't recover it. Now that was the end of the sample papers, but then I went and I take my notes, and I took it with a wet broad in a Levenger True Writer, and look at what happens with that wet broad. Look at that shading that is going on. I put no fear it dries darker, because when you first put it down, it is very, very light. And then it does get darker over time, and you get all this lovely shading all the way through. This is great. This is a great ink. It's a yellow ink, but it's like a yellow-brown ink. It is absolutely fantastic. And that's all that I have for this writing sample. Instead of finding inks that look like Krishna's Dhaanu Udhak, I would prefer to find an ink that complements its color on the page. I've chosen Private Reserve's Sonic Blue because this is a screaming blue ink that can go great with this kind of yellow-brown that we're getting here. Before I give my opinion on this ink, I would ask, if you've enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up. And if it's your first time here, I would invite you to subscribe. So what do I think of Krishna's Dhaanu Udhak? I think being yellow, people would avoid it. But there's no fear with this ink. It dries much darker than it writes. The shading is gorgeous out of every nib on every paper. This ink is amazing. It is a yellow ink that everybody should try. And who would think that everybody should try a yellow ink? It's amazing. Thanks for watching.